There comes a stage in the empath journey when sensitivity no longer feels like a gift. What once seemed like intuition, compassion, and emotional depth begins to feel heavy, confusing, and exhausting. This is the second stage of the empath path, the overwhelmed empath. If the first stage, which is the naive empath, is the one who gives without boundaries, the overwhelmed empath is the one who has begun to feel the consequences of that pattern. They still care deeply, they still feel everything, but now they are tired. Their nervous system is strained. Their heart is full of compassion, but their spirit is burdened by emotional overload. The overwhelmed empath often reaches this stage after years and years of unprotected sensitivity. They have spent so much time tending to others that their inner reserves have thinned. Their compassion remains intact, but their energy does not. This empath still wants to help, but now help feels costly. They answer messages while feeling depleted. They listen while silently hoping that the conversation ends soon. They say yes while their body begs for rest. They care, but resentment starts to appear beside care. Guilt starts to mingle with love. Exhaustion starts to replace joy. That contradiction can be deeply painful because the overwhelmed empath is not heartless. They are overloaded. I remember writing in a journal during this stage. Why do I feel irritated when people need me? Why do I feel at ease when I'm alone? Why am I tired after doing things I used to enjoy? Why does everyone else's energy feel louder than my own? At that time, I judged myself harshly. I thought I was becoming selfish or moody or emotionally weak. But the truth was different. I was experiencing emotional saturation. The overwhelmed empath has reached a point where the system can no longer process endless emotional input without consequence. Constant exposure to noise, conflict, and chaos now makes their mind foggy. Their body becomes tense, their patience shortens, their tolerance for drama decreases dramatically. Sometimes they withdraw from people entirely, not because they dislike them, but because solitude becomes the only place where they can hear themselves again. This stage often confuses their loved ones or even the people around them. People who benefited from the empath's constant availability may say you've changed. They may not understand why the once endlessly supportive person now needs distance, silence, or boundaries. But change is often the first sign of healing. The overwhelmed empath is beginning to realize that constant access to their energy was never sustainable. There are good qualities in this stage even though it may not feel like it. The overwhelmed empath becomes more aware than ever before. They begin noticing patterns that the naive empath ignored. They can feel which environments disturb their peace. They recognize which relationships leave them drained. They sense when someone is using vulnerability as manipulation. They notice when their body tightens around certain people. This awareness is uncomfortable because it's in the transition stage, but it's powerful. The overwhelmed empath also develops a stronger need for truth. Surface level interactions become tiring, forced positivity becomes irritating, emotional dishonesty becomes obvious. They begin craving sincerity, depth, and calm. But because they cannot get them, the overwhelmed empath may become reactive. Small issues feel large because their emotional bandwidth is already full. They may snap at people they love. They may isolate so intensely that loneliness replaces peace. They may avoid all emotional responsibility, swinging from overgiving to emotional shutdown. Sometimes they can become cynical. After giving so much and feeling so depleted, they may start believing people are selfish, relationships are draining, and kindness is dangerous. They may mistake burnout for permanent truth. They overthink every invitation, every phone call, every crowded event because they know how deeply they are affected by stimulation. They may feel trapped, tired, and exhausted even if all they are doing is just lying in bed. I remember canceling plans because I could already feel the fatigue before leaving home. I remember feeling guilty for not answering messages quickly enough. I remember wanting to bond but dreading the energy it seemed to require. That is the emotional paradox of the overwhelmed empath. Because they care deeply, they are burdened by this very act of caring. It's even worse if they have been through physical and emotional abuse, as empaths have a very high chance of being with these kinds of narcissists. In this case, after going through all that mental and emotional turmoil, they become numb both physically and emotionally. They feel dead inside. At this stage, many empaths ask the wrong question. They ask, what is the point of living? Everything starts to seem meaningless to them. But the deeper question to be asked is, how do I not abandon myself? That shift changes everything, because the solution is not numbness, it is regulation. The overwhelmed empath does not need to become colder. They need skills, they need boundaries, nervous system recovery, emotional clarity, and permission to honor their own needs. Boundaries are not cruelty, selectivity is not arrogance. The beginning of transformation begins once they realize to prioritize oneself over others. They start cleansing oneself and their environment. They start cutting people off or maintaining distance with people who bring toxicity in their life. The overwhelmed empath begins to stop treating every need around them as an emergency. They begin healing when they notice their body before responding to others. They begin healing when they stop explaining every boundary. They begin healing when they understand that compassion offered from depletion eventually becomes resentment. This stage often teaches the empath to listen to physical signals: tension in the stomach, fatigue after certain calls, relief when plans are cancelled, peace when certain people are absent, anxiety before entering draining spaces. The body often knows before the mind admits it. One of the greatest lessons of the overwhelmed empath is this: sensitivity without stewardship becomes suffering. You cannot pour endlessly from an unprotected vessel. You cannot be everyone's safe place while neglecting your own. You cannot continue absorbing chaos and expect inner calm. This stage may feel like breaking down, but often it is breaking patterns. The empath who once overextended now begins to question old habits. Why must I always be the listener? Why do I feel guilty resting? Why do I tolerate one-sided relationships? Why do I equate love with exhaustion? Those questions are sacred. They are the doorway out of overwhelm. If I could speak to myself in that season, I would write this: you are not failing because you need space. You are not selfish because you need peace. You are not weak because noise affects you. Your sensitivity is asking for wiser management, not punishment. The overwhelmed empath is not the final version of the empath. It is the refining fire. This stage strips illusions. It reveals unsustainable relationships. It exposes false obligations. It confronts people-pleasing. It teaches that empathy without self-care collapses under its own weight. And though extremely painful, this phase creates the conditions for maturity and transformation. Because once the empath becomes aware of overwhelm, they can no longer pretend depletion is normal. They begin choosing different friendships. They begin honoring quiet. They begin saying no faster. They begin noticing who respects boundaries and who resents them. They begin reclaiming emotional ownership, and this is where wisdom starts. So if you are in this stage now, tired, overstimulated, conflicted, wanting both connection and distance, know that you are not lost. You are in transition. Your exhaustion is information. Your irritability is a signal. Your need for solitude is communication. Your sensitivity is asking to be partnered with strength. Do not confuse this stage with failure. Many powerful people go through a stage where their old way of loving no longer works. That discomfort is growth. You are not meant to stay overwhelmed forever. The empath journey continues beyond this stage. There is a third stage where discernment strengthens, where healing deepens, where emotional responsibility becomes clearer. That is the conscious empath, and even beyond this lies the fourth stage, the empowered empath. The empowered empath still feels deeply but no longer carries what is not theirs. They can enter a room without absorbing it. They can support others without becoming responsible for them. They can love generously while protecting their peace. They understand that boundaries do not block love, they direct it wisely. They are calm where they once were chaotic, clear where they once were confused, and grounded where they once were overwhelmed. And the seeds of that empowered self are planted in this very stage. Every time you rest instead of overextending, you grow. Every time you say no without apology, you grow. Every time you choose peace over performance, you grow. Every time you trust your body's signals, you grow. One day, you will look back and realize overwhelm was not your enemy, it was your teacher. It showed you where you were leaking energy, where you were betraying yourself, where compassion needed wisdom beside it. So honor this chapter. The overwhelmed empath is not broken. They are awakening to the cost of unconscious giving and learning a new way to live. And when you finally step into the stage of the empowered empath, you will understand that you were never meant to feel less. You were meant to feel deeply, live wisely, and carry your gift with strength.